Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here on this lovely spring day. I'm Meida McNeal with the Chicago Black Social Culture Map and Honey Pot Performance. We want to welcome you to our second installment for the year of the Chicago Black Social Culture Map kind of live programming. The online map is a project we've been building for several years and continue to grow. If you go out in the hallway, you can get a taste of this map that we're building that has over 350 online spaces now of kind of black social culture from the Great Migration forward, really focused in a lot of ways on kind of dance music and house culture, but then also trying to connect that dance music culture to the black social traditions preceding it to create a larger story for our cultural contributions in this city. So today I want to say a few things before I kick it over to Dr. Reed. I just want to welcome our team or announce our team. So some of the members of the Chicago Black Social Culture Map are Dwayne Powell over here, Abra Johnson, who's taping, Jody Presser, Larissa Johnson, and Lauren Lowery and Skyla Hearn. So I'm going to also say thank you to the Chicago Black History Forum and Dr. Reed for hosting us for this event. And Dr. Reed, if you would like to say a few words of welcome.
And I will be brief. On behalf of the Black Chicago History Forum, a collaborative embracing every aspect of African American culture and African continental culture, welcome. I'm especially pleased to see folks here who represent a large body of groups committed to music, and I feel a little odd because my folks said you are forbidden to listen to music after Johnny Ace passed away. Anybody remember Johnny Ace? He does. He'll tell you who Johnny is. By the way, Johnny Ace was before Sam Cooke. Oh, wow. But I'm pleased to be informed about the importance of house music and to work with Lauren Lowery. And I look forward to many other events of this type. If you're interested in learning more about the Black Chicago History Forum, contact Lauren, and we'll have information available through you. But welcome again. This is going to be a big success, and this is the place where it should be happening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Lowery with the Modern Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation. We are an archive foundation dedicated to the preservation and celebration of house music and its global arches. Feel free to come to the mapping station and learn more about what the Chicago Black Social Culture Map is doing. It's a phenomenal project highlighting all of the black music in Chicago, all those spaces where black people hung out, partied, made themselves a part of Chicago, which is also sometimes not that easy to do, but they made family and friends, and we need to honor those places. Many of them have disappeared, very much like house music spaces have disappeared in Chicago. So welcome. Good luck today, have fun today, ask a lot of questions today. You've got some phenomenal pioneers all day. Thank you.
Good morning, well, good afternoon. Again, my name is Skyla Hearn. I am the Chief Archivist and Special Collections Librarian here at the DuSable Museum of African American History. So again, I represent the DuSable Museum. I also represent Actively Archiving, as well as a very phenomenal group of archivists. And our particular group here in Chicago, we are Blackivists Chicago, and I would like for them to come on down. On the DuSable side, G. Jordan Williams. G. Jordan, will you please Thank you. So on the DuSable side, G. Jordan Williams works with me in the archives, as well as Erica Griffin in the education department. And so for the Blackavists, we think that it's very important that, well, one, of course, you know, everyone understand how important it is to conserve, preserve, you know, our very important and rich heritage, our very important and rich histories. And we are the people who are on the forefronts and who is doing this work. And so while, again, we do represent institutions, we are also community archivists. We work as a very brilliant, I'm going to say that and pat us all on the back, group of, you know, credentialed people, and we all have individual niche or, you know, expertise that we're able to provide. So if you find yourself in the position where you have a body of materials, or someone in the community, or someone in your church, or as the family historian yourself, and you know you're in a predicament and you don't know what to do with those materials, we are those people. Reach out to us, let us know. We will be there on the spot to address your needs, to assess, and to work you through, because that's the other part. We do recognize that, you know, we have letters, but we also recognize that we are in support of the community. So we're not necessarily always the ones who are on the forefront leading the conversations. We also look to you to help us then, to help you with those conversations. So just very briefly, if you guys don't mind, so you're seeing the face to the name. I'd just like for you guys to step over, give a quick intro of who you are, and then, you know, we'll get started with our program. And again, thank you all so much for your time and for being here with us throughout the course of the day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacie Williams, and I'm the director of the Center for Digital Scholarship at the University of Chicago, as part of the University of Chicago Libraries. I guess my niche, as Skyla mentioned, is really around digital infrastructure, long-term sustainability and planning. So, like, say you have a website, but what happens if the company that hosts that service shuts down, like Vine? How do you save? How do you extract your materials and keep them in a digitally preserved format so that it really is there for the long term, and your links don't die, your photos don't die, your work doesn't rot digitally? Thank you.
So I'll keep it very brief, but my name is Tracy Drake. My 9 to 5, I work at the Vivian G. Harsh Research Collection, which is at the Woodson Regional Library, a part of Chicago Public Library. I am the archivist there. I guess my focus there is like mixed media. I focus on preservation, conservation of archival material. And then I guess I want to say that I'm also a Black Chicago historian. So I'm familiar with U.S. history and Black Chicago history. So I use that expertise to help assist me when I'm in the archives. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Booth, and I am an archivist at the Barack Obama Presidential Library, which is a part of the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration. And in my role, I manage the audiovisual collection, which consists of about 3.2 million born digital photographs and over 650 cubic feet of video and audio recordings. And so AV materials are pretty much my expertise, and I'm happy to be here.
And just one last very important thing that I forgot is to put out a request to you, our audience, our panelists, which is, if you would, and if you're interested, we'd like for you to then add to our stories. We will have an oral history booth or room set up right outside of the Margaret Burroughs' exhibition, and we will have people around to escort you to that space. Right outside of the Ames Auditorium to your right is the Hamilton Institute, where we have equipment set up. So if you have objects with you, photographs, things of that nature, then we're ready to get it started. And if not, then please reach out to us and we can work with you with that in the future. And again, thank you all so much.
Yes, so we will now begin our panels. And for our first session, when disco turned house, the origins of house music in Chicago, we have Jesse Saunders, who is going to moderate this panel, and I'm going to introduce him. So Jesse Saunders, a Kenwood High School alum, is known as one of the primary architects of house music, released the world's first house music recording on vinyl. On and On is not simply the first house music of all time, it is also among the most iconic. Rolling Stone named it the most influential record in house music. First released on January 20th, 1984 via his upstart label, Just Say Records in Chicago, the release set the wheels in motion for a sound that continues to grow in influence and popularity to this very day. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jesse to moderate this panel and introduce the other panelists. Thank you, Jesse.
All right, hello everyone. How you doing today? I just flew in from Las Vegas and it was 95 degrees when I left. So you can imagine the surprise I got this morning, right? But thank you all for braving it and coming on out. And they told me earlier, it's like, you forget, you've been gone from Chicago for so long, that doesn't stop Chicago people from coming, so thank you. Anyway, this year, as she said, January 20th marks the 35th anniversary of On and On. That's 35 years of house music in Chicago. Now, through the years, there are a lot of different opinions as to when it actually started. I like to look at the worldview of it, but also being from Chicago and being a part of the movement, I have to look at it from that side as well. So I've assembled a panel here of distinguished gentlemen and a lady, one of which is a Kenwood alumni, well, couple of which is a Kenwood alumni. Anyway, the point is this. There was a point when disco, which actually started in the late 60s. A lot of people want to say it started in the 70s, but it actually started in the late 60s. There was a point when disco died. A lot of people want to say that was 1979 at Comiskey Park, when Steve Dahl blew up all the disco records, which weren't all disco records. There were a lot of R&B records in there and a lot of other jazz records and so on and so forth. But I've done a few documentaries where Rolling Stone did one, and I did one within Red Bull, where they wanted to say that out of the ashes of disco demolition, which occurred in 1979, grew house music, which we know today. I have a few opinions on that, but since I'm moderating, I'm going to let the panel actually speak to that, and maybe I'll interject at some point. So, without further ado, let me introduce the panel. We have George Daniels. George has been a supporter of my, everywhere I see him, if it's in the airport or whatever, he always comes and he's like, you did the first house record. And I'm like, thanks for reminding me that, man. So George came to Chicago in 1959 in 8th grade. All right. Flew into Midway Airport. I just flew into Midway. My hasn't changed. And 4 years later, he'd have George's music room at Midway Airport. And he wants to thank Mayor Daley for that. 40 years strong, right? He first entered the music industry at Chess Records, 1965. All right. You all remember Chess Records? All right. So he basically was a janitor and eventually became driver for artists like Etta James, Billy Stewart, and then he worked for One Stop Records from, what is this, 1960 what?
67.
1967, okay. And then he opened George's Music Room. Presently, as you can see on all the chairs there, make sure you take one of those flyers with you. He has a branding and licensing deal, George's Beverage Depot at 55th and the Dan Ryan Expressway. Let's give it up for George. Now, Craig, my friend Craig, he has a long bio. I've known Craig for a very, very long time. I'm going to let him basically talk about himself after I give a brief. See, you didn't let me finish. After I give a brief bio on you. The reason why this is funny is because back in the days when we were first starting, he had a crew that used to throw parties, and my crew, the Chosen Few, threw parties as well. And kind of rivals at that point, but since then we've grown up, and we've learned that we need to work together to support this thing we call house music. But Craig's a great guy, and he got on the music scene in 1979, realizing that music was his true gift from God and the direction of his mentor, Frankie Knuckles, the late, great Frankie Knuckles. Give it up for Frankie. He decided to take it further, attending Columbia College, where he received a degree in art and entertainment management and sound engineering. As time went on, he made few important contacts and accomplishments in Chicago's entertainment scene. After redesigning the system for Frankie's club, the Power Plant, 1015, see, I want him to talk about this himself. You know what? We're going to leave it at that. You're going to do the rest. Give it up for Craig. And my man, Rob Olson, down there on the end. Rob Olson was at the forefront of the burgeoning house music scene when he served as producer of the Street Beat program on WNUR in Evanston, Illinois, from 1985 to 1988. Under Rob's guidance, the incorporation of house became a cornerstone of the nightly show, which featured the many different styles and genres of soul and dance music, presented by a diverse array of DJs and mixers. At that time, Street Beat emerged as an influential outlet for the exposure of house, as WNUR signal covered most of the Chicagoland area. In 1986, now this is the milestone, in 1986, London-based record company Rhythm King Records sought out Rob to produce house music compilations, which became Rob Olson's Chicago Jack Beat, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I was featured on that. Let's give it up for Rob. And last but certainly not least, the lady on the panel, a good friend of mine and Kenwood alumni, is Marta Bailey Hopkins. She first discovered house music in 1977, right after her experiences with disco in 1976. We're going to talk about that. I was a freshman, or she was a freshman at Spelman College, and remember going to parties they had in the gym. She noticed these guys were off on the sidelines dancing by themselves. They were doing pirouettes and dancing with their shadows. I found them intriguing, or she found them intriguing. Her and her girlfriend over to meet them. They reminded her of the boys she knew back home, which is Chicago, who loved wearing Izods and Levi jeans, but they were different. After the party at Spelman, they asked if she and her girlfriend wanted to go with them dancing. They took us to Backstreet, the first gay club she ever went to. The music was very loud and high energy. Yeah. Disco at its finest. Do you really want me to say this?
I can say it.
Okay, you say it. We'll leave it at that. She attended many clubs in Chicago's early days, a lot of gay clubs, which were the cornerstone of what was disco and later became house. So give it up for the panel. All right. The first thing I want to do is I want to define what exactly is disco. Who wants to take that one? Craig?
Don't call me out.
I'm calling you out. Go ahead. That one's for you. That one's for you.
What is disco?
Yeah, what exactly is disco music?
I would say that disco was a form of music that came out in the late 70s that introduced a strong 4/4 beat and heavy instrumentation. Lots of percussions, if you want to put it that way.
Okay. Anybody else? George, can you give us a definition of disco?
I made a lot of money off of it.
That's a good thing. I know you did.
No, but it was actually, I think disco was like the introduction of a single record on a 12-inch. I can remember some of the major labels that weren't aware of a single being on a 12-inch. If some of you guys remember who bought 12 inches in those days, like Motown, for example, they just wanted to have a big record, and they would take the 45, and it would be like 2 or 3 minutes long, but you'd have that much empty vinyl, if you will, on it. So I would add that to the definition of disco.
Marta?
I would say disco for me is dance music. Dance music.
Dance music.
Dance music, absolutely.
I thought that, growing up on the North Shore, it was, music that was played in this iconic club Studio 54 in New York. And so that's what the music was being played there and coming westward to Chicago. And then we had a disco station for a little bit in the late 70s, WDAI. And so that was what exposed me to disco.
I have an interesting question. What styles of music was disco born out of? Does anyone know?
Soul music.
Yeah, definitely soul music.
Exactly, because, to expound on that, R&B was a term created by Billboard magazine, because all of our music was soul music. Motown, everything was soul music. Our music consisted of gospel, blues, jazz, and soul, which included R&B, but the Billboard charts pumped it up because they didn't want a chart called soul, because you know what soul represented. Call it what it is.
George, when or at what point did you recognize a disco record coming through your stores or across your table?
I'm trying to recall the label, because there's only a few labels that had it. Sound Soul. Yep, the Sound Soul Orchestra.
Do you remember the year that was?
No.
Around what year?
It was 70-something.
78.
Yeah.
Late 70s? Okay. Does anybody remember Disco DAI? WDAI.
Yep.
You had,
That was the best radio station.
who played on that station?
Well, I remember one of the remixers was Peter Lewicki.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Jeff Davis, Peter Lewicki. That's all I can remember.
And one more important one.
Kenny Jason.
Kenny Jason. That's right. Can't forget Kenny.
Jason, yeah.
Okay, so
That was the first.
Go ahead, go
that
ahead.
was
No,
one
no,
of
go
the
ahead.
first radio stations that had the lunchtime mixes, way before BMX and people like that.
do you remember what year?
Our own little private radio station. All the people that went to the warehouse, we would hear this music that we would hear Frankie play on WDAI, and it was unbelievable. And the day that they closed, where they shut down WDAI, we thought this was going to be the best day of the world in music. But they played Donna Summer's Last Dance from the time they opened to the time they signed off.
24 hours.
And over
24 hours.
and over. We kept waiting. We thought they were going to give us the lunch break mix. They didn't do it. They played Last Dance all day long.
That's pretty symbolic, though.
That's because everyone was gone from the studio. They just let it play.
All day
It was a loop.
long. Yeah.
That was the song.
Okay, now we want to define what exactly house music is. Craig?
Well, house music to me has more than one meaning. And I think the sooner the masses and everyone accepts that, the less bickering and fighting that we'll have about who created house music and things like that. House music, one of the first meanings of house music was a representation of the music that Frankie was playing at the warehouse. So the group of people that was attending the warehouse, in their description of that particular sound, which at the time was disco, Euro, R&B, all kinds of music. It wasn't just dance, it was all dance music, but it was different genres of dance music. In their description of that particular sound of music, they would just say house music, the music that Frankie was playing at the warehouse. That's their description of the music. So boom, that was your first definition. Then you have the definition of house music as a musical genre, which did not happen until the late 80s, about 83, when Jesse and the guys first started. All your originators of individual producers and DJs started to create their music, this particular sound, which actually was the offspring of the disco that they were listening to that Frankie used to play, and a couple other DJs that used to play. So the definition as a description of a culture, and then the description of a genre, and that's what house music is. Now, if you want to break it down to me, what I think house music is as the genre, it was producers and DJs and little guys who got a hold of electronic equipment, drum machines and everything, who wanted to start producing, and they were trying to imitate the sounds and the songs that they heard Frankie and various other DJs play, but because they didn't have full training in keyboards and all of that, the instrumentation was extremely minimal, but the drum tracks were intense because everybody learned how to program a drum machine. So you came up with a product that was very, very drum heavy and very intricate drum-wise, but very simple instrumentation-wise. And to me, that was the birth of house music.
Rob?
Boy, the Frankie Knuckles warehouse and all that, that was really kind of before my time. I kind of caught the wave in college radio where we were playing a lot of the salsa stuff and the older stuff, and as the Chicago material began to emerge, and we caught on to that stuff from the Hot Mix 5 on BMX, because a lot of those tracks are being played actually on the radio in mixes, but not really being played in its entirety. And I don't think Chicago radio ever embraced house music as a single form. It was more featured in the hot mixes. And at WNUR, we were playing all the tracks, the songs in its versions, the 12-inch versions or the 7-inch versions. And so and Jesse's material was really the first stuff that we had embraced and started to play.
Great. Marta? What's your idea of house music?
So, and I'm kind of on the page with Craig as far as, for me, house started with the Warehouse 206, South Jefferson. And in preparing for this and kind of thinking about my past and the experiences that I had, I can recall, you mentioned in my intro, that my first experiences with music were disco in Atlanta. I was away at Spelman in the late 70s, and it was interesting, and it was just like a phenomena that seemed to be happening simultaneously. When I came home from school that winter, my friends were like, "You gotta check out the warehouse, you gotta check out the warehouse." And so we went, and it was phenomenal. It was, to me, a little bit like disco, like on steroids, because the music was so much more intense. There was the bass and just the feeling that I had just being in the atmosphere in the room. And the experiences that I had in Atlanta were more disco-oriented, going to places. And I would also think that there was disco, and then before the term house, because I didn't categorize it as house at that time. I guess it was more like underground music. And it was music that I went to going to the gay clubs. And that was the experience that I had in Atlanta. There were places like the Locker Room and Numbers and The Difference. Those were clubs in Atlanta. And then when I came back to Chicago, it was the Warehouse. And it was funny because we would find little places. Then it was like the Rialto. And I stopped partying at that time when the Power Plant and the Music Box were big. But I was definitely 206. And I call myself really now a house music snob, because I didn't I felt that was really what house was, 206 Jefferson. And that was because of the name The Warehouse with, you know, Ziggy and Robert and just everybody else, Freddie, and just.
What about you, George?
Now, this is where I become controversial.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it is. But no, but as a merchant, the definition of it was different than, because the music was created before the venues played it. And so it's hard to call the music house when house came out before the warehouse. My definition of, because of this gentleman over here having the first house record, on and on. And retailers like myself, we go to Barney's, which is a one-stop, Fletcher's, you had Joe's, you had Gardner's, Colorite. These were the sub-distributors, if you will. And there was no distributor for On and On except Jesse. And so, this funny thing, I guess you've seen this picture up here with the house and that label he's on up there. That was Jesse's house. And the guys would say, man, George, where'd you get the record at? Because everybody was out of it. I called his house. That's where we described house music, because it came from Jesse's house, period. Because that's not a definition of music house, but it's house. On Prairie, if I'm not
King Drive.
It was a King.
King Drive.
I thought I used to say Prairie. Anyway.
7234 King Drive.
There it is. But that's where
It was on the label,
all
too.
my fellow retailers, George, where'd you get it? He come, man, call his house. That's where we got the definition of house music, period.
I'd like to help add to that. Sure. That's also one of the, definitions when we were talking about the young producers and DJs that were getting into the industry. They created the records in their homes. And that was part of when we said house music, because that particular style of music wasn't being done in the big recording studios and everything.
But who
it was
did
actually
it in
being
home
produced.
first?
Well, we're not gonna.
Jesse Saunders.
Well, no.
Well, he had the first record.
He had
then.
the first vinyl record.
Well, that's all I cared about.
He said, I'm a retailer. That's all I care about.
You were selling it, so on the same time. Because actually, at the same time, but at the same time, I give Jesse the credit of having the first released vinyl record in house music. Okay. But there were a few other tracks that were out around the same time, but they weren't on vinyl. Jesse.
Okay, we're gonna get to that, Craig. Don't jump the gun.
But you did have local DJs, because the tape situation when the cassettes came out. Then you had local DJs, DJ D-Man and so on and so forth, who used to use a magic marker and do 15-minute mixes with the house music 12 inches. You had Eric DeWiz and so on and so forth. And so this is how the music wound up on cassette tape so people could play in their cars, because you didn't have a turntable in your car.
Another thing, I think one of the problems that we have today and why the definition of house music gets so clouded is because house people have adopted everything. And let me explain to you. You're not going to tell Teddy Pendergrass that Bad Luck was a house track. But you go to a house head and say Bad Luck ain't a house track, they're ready to kill you. See, we have taken certain songs, different genres. It didn't even, give you another example. There was a track Frankie played, weird song, called Walk the Dog by Lowery Anderson. True house heads lived. They knew, it didn't even really have a beat. It was just like a break song before something big came on. But they call it house. Lowery Anderson didn't have an idea where house music didn't even exist then, what we call house. But that's another problem. I say house people they adopt music, make it their own, and then it clouds the true definition of what it is.
Are you done? Oh, okay. I want to make sure before I go on.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to those fabulous 70s. All right, disco is going on. We've got the gay clubs on the north side, and a few straight people start going down there. You remember what year that was?
1979, 80, 81.
Okay, so Marta, what year did you go to Craig Thompson's party at Den 1?
I think it was either 78 or 79.
Okay.
Yeah, It was in the winter, I know that. It was probably 79, 78, yeah.
And who was the DJ playing at Den 1?
So I know now that it was Ron Hardy, but I wasn't into DJs like that. I just was like, I liked how the music made me feel. So, and I'll never forget that party, and my friend Rudy and I were dancing on the speakers to Cheryl Lynn, To Be Real. I remember that, and yeah.
Nice. So I want to ask the audience a question. How many people in this audience went to Den 1? How many went to the warehouse? Do you remember what year you first went to Den 1? 78? 76. All right. Was Ron there in 76? Ron Hardy?
What was that one?
Ooh, I forgot. That was
Okay.
before my time. I came in 206.
What was that? Oh, that was later on. That was the music box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's under.
Yeah, we'll get there. I'm trying to start at the point where we finally learned that there was a scene going on. And by this, I'm saying the commercial public. Obviously, in the gay clubs and whatnot, they had plenty going on long before we knew about it, which is why we were trying to get there. So that point when it actually happened, Craig, when was the first time that you actually went to a club other than the warehouse or Den 1 back in those days?
Well, you have to remember, we were just had a discussion about this the other day. At the same time that, well, no, not at the same time, 76, Den 1 was way before our time. But when you start getting into 79, 80, in the early 80s, there was a growth being built by the teens on the south side that I'm familiar with of Chicago. That was also at the same time that the warehouse was doing its thing, there was a large group of teens doing their stuff on the south side. And that's because Kurt Townsend and a couple of guys, I don't know who else was with him, had Mendel going on. And Mendel to me was the catalyst of all the little house parties. Because back then we were all going to Mendel, and then at Mendel you had these groups, dance groups that were breaking off. Everybody, that was the big thing. It wasn't disco, it wasn't called house then. It was just really good dance music. And you had like little dance groups, high school dance groups was developing, like, the Doctors, the Code Red, all these different groups. And these groups started branching off and started giving parties. And then we started really hitting the 22nd Street area, 22nd and Michigan Street area real hard, because it was kind of like known for house music. We had the Loft, First Impressions. The Playground wasn't even open yet, but we had the Loft, First Impressions, Sawyer's. That whole area right there was just all about, if you want to call it house right now. But because I went that far, I lost my train of thought of what your question was.
I was just asking the first club that you went to
that was not
the Den 1 or the warehouse, and not on the south side.
Ooh. I couldn't remember. I'm gonna just.
Okay, I have a special guest that I want to bring on for one moment. He's the man that Craig just talked about. Kirk Townsend. My first experience, he also happens to be my cousin. But my first experience with any of this was at Mendel High School, where he was the DJ. So I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit, how that came about, what year you started, and the progression moving forward to the disco scene and so on and so forth.
I came to listen and learn today.
Yeah, you got all the knowledge, though.
Craig hit the nail on the head, and I've listened to everybody up there. George hit the nail on the head regarding R&B and how Billboard, the one thing he left out was it was virtually that way because they didn't want you to cross over to white music, so they called it R&B charts. Do I have to?
They need to archive.
They've got me before.
You know you love this.
Man, I got bamboozled, led astray, run amok.
It was a big plan.
Plymouth Rock just landed on me. What's up, Mitch? How are you, sir? I'll talk briefly about Mendel. For those who don't know, Mendel Catholic High School was a 40-acre campus on the south side of Chicago. It's now Gwendolyn Brooks High School. And in 1975, I started DJing parties there. And it was ran by the Order of St. Augustine, Augustinian priests, who entrusted a 15-year-old young man to teach them how to make money and drive revenue, especially lost revenue due to the white flight out of Roseland, a school that went from 1,900 students to about 900 students in 2 years' time. And they needed income to keep the doors open of the school, especially after it turned all black. And so came up with this idea because the gym set over the cafeteria, and it had 4 ways up and downstairs, that we created a bi-level party that people can listen to 2 different DJs on each level and keep the flow, keep the party going. That's what the whole concept was. Let's keep the party going. And just to piggyback off some of the record stuff, Jesse, I can remember 12 inches as far back as 75. I was in record pools early on. I was in Discotheque, was the first record pool with Rocky Jones and a couple of guys. Then I left Discotheque and went to the Dogs of War with our buddy Eddie Thomas. And so I was in record pools, and I got 12 inches, and I can remember them sending out, you mentioned the Motown, they did a 12-inch, the first one I remember, late 75, had Down to Love Town on one side and Fancy Dancer by the Commodores on the other side. So, you know, if you need to go fast, you can flip it over. If you need to slow it down, you can flip it over and do something else. But a lot of it was disco. There was a combination of disco, R&B, soul, most like George, but a lot of it was soul. You know, all this music emanates from the soul. And, you know, if you didn't have something that didn't make your neck snap or get your toe to tapping or your feet to moving, you know, it was just a unique situation where for over 13 years we attracted 3,000 to 4,000 kids every Saturday night for over 13 years. Yeah. And without one incident. Yep. So it was a historic situation that, and even long after I stopped DJing, I ran the parties for the Augustinians.
So in 1975, real quick, because I need to move this forward. 1975, what were you playing? What were your big records?
Oh, God. And you know what? At that time, it varied from every 6 months. Records were dictated by the dances, whereas what I would say about disco music allowed you more freedom of, so if you weren't a dancer and you couldn't know how to dance, you sought more freedom in the movement of disco, which gave you the freedom to do whatever you wanted to do. And whereas a lot of I can remember playing like D.C. LaRue Cathedrals or Odyssey, and it varied all over the place, and it depended on what people were dancing to. And you wanted to play for your audience, and it must have worked to attract 3,000 to 4,000 kids every week. And so it varied. It wasn't quite one particular genre. I mean, we went all over the place. I remember when one of the first big 12 inches I got was early '76, and that was Hit and Run, Lolita Holloway. And huge record. Chicago Girl, you know, came out, and it sold like crazy. So this is like '76. And so we're playing that in the first 6 months of the year, but in the second 6 months of the year, you're playing something different. So, and the dance dictated that. And I think that's what kind of created like a commercial versus disco. But most of the disco, and that led to a lot of the stuff you guys were playing, like Beyond Disco DAI, when the punk scene came on and they were playing punk music.
So hold
to
on,
me,
let me-
punk kind of led
Let me
more
stop
to
you there for a
house than
second.
anything. But-
So when I first came over there, I was 15 years old, going into my sophomore year, 1977. What were you playing that year that was hot?
Oh, 77? Oh, well, probably some of the hottest records was a young man from Blue Island, Illinois, bought me an acetate of a record he told me was going to be the biggest record of the lifetime. His name was Peter Brown.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say that.
And he was smart enough to know that, you know, where to bring records. You know, obviously, if I got an audience of 3,000 to 4,000 kids as opposed to 200-300,
Yeah.
they're seeking me out to play music. And I never will forget that. This young man came over. He said, "I've got an acetate I want you to put on, and I want you to play this record. You'll be the first one to play it." And it was, "Do You Want to Get Funky With Me?"
Okay, and what was going on in terms of the crowd that was listening to what you were playing?
Oh, they were losing
went-
their minds.
They went crazy.
Yeah.
Actually, I was
They went
there.
crazy, but
I was there.
what I'm getting to though is there was a special kind of dance group thing going on
Oh,
to the
yeah.
music. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, that kind of came out of, so there's newspaper articles where when we had parties at Mendel, the Chicago police said crime went down 30% each night we had a dance at Mendel. Chicago Defender, different newspapers, you can look it up for yourselves. And so what we called our gangs, which were dance groups.
Dance groups.
You worked out your shit on the dance floor, and you made the other people look stupid. You know, I mean, they were choreographed. I mean, it was like, you tell I wasn't dancing, but they were choreographed. Like the names of the groups, the doctors, the nurses, the men in high rank, the secretaries, everybody had a name. They picked a name.
And T-shirts.
They went with it. And T-shirts.
T-shirts, yeah.
And it was the fashion. And if you couldn't dance on that level, a lot of times people in the parties, you got 2,000 to 3,000 people standing around watching this one group perform. It was like being at a rock concert or something.
You had a classmate by the name of Craig Thompson.
Yes, I did.
Do you remember the year he threw his party down at the Den One?
Yes, I did. He was in '78 was when he first started doing it. But Craig was thinking about it in late '77, and he was starring it then. I remember sitting in the library at school, and he was asking me about doing this. And one of the unique things about Den One, and I think what attracted to people that were graduating from Mendel, because it was the high school scene, and was going to the next level, was Den One offered the free-spirited music. They offered the fruit table and the punch, which you want to stay away from. And so you could go down and have like a psychedelic experience, you know, because the fruit was laced with 100% alcohol or whatever else. And so, you know, the whole free spirit thing came about. Ronnie's playing music backwards, forwards. Ronnie's energy was just through the roof, unbelievable. It was just a different experience. So it was the next level experience for a lot of people.
Do you remember your classmate Bob Peters?
Yes, I do.
I remember about Peter.
He was one of the first people to do what at the warehouse?
Throw a straight party, you know, to introduce young straight people to what was at that time an all-gay private club. Robert opened it up as U.S. Studios as a private membership club for gays only, and he tried to DJ, and that didn't work, obviously. And you know, he tried to get Larry Levan to come, and Larry said, "No, it ain't happening." And Frankie saw the opportunity, and he came to Chicago. So you know, and the rest was history. But that was one of the things he brought a lot of the young straight people into experience the underground gay movement, which was going on around Chicago in a lot of different places long before the warehouse opened. I mean, there was so many gay, but it was so underground that a lot of people didn't know it until the warehouse, that it was out in the open as to what was going on and how gay people party. I was familiar with it because all the gay guys rented equipment from me. All the gay DJs from Sharon Webb to Gene White to Craig Cannon, Michael Ezebuku. I can go on forever. So I was familiar with it. The parties at 185 West, across the street from City Hall, on the 5th floor. You know.
I'm going to have to cut you off a little bit because
go ahead. I'm sorry. I can keep going.
Thank you,
Can
Kurt.
I go back to my seat now?
Yes, you can.
All right.
We needed that insight from Mendel, though. Give it up for Kirk Townsend. The reason why I needed that was because prior to that 79, 78 period, there were a lot of things going on the South Side, especially at Mendel. As a young kid coming in there myself, my eyes were wide open and I had no idea. But one of the things that I've learned throughout my career and playing in all of these different festivals and raves and things like that was Mendel was the first idea of a rave, or of a multi-festival type of event, and it was very important in the evolution. All right, so let's go back a little bit again. I was listening to you, Craig, on WNUR the other day on Wednesday with Robert Williams. Anybody tune in for that? Get to hear any of that? If you didn't, it was amazing. But on Wednesdays, definitely you want to tune in for Lowery Branch and Kevin McFall when they're hosting that. But anyway, I heard Robert say that he opened the warehouse in 1974.
I believe he did.
Yeah?
That's what he
But
said.
it was U.S. Studios then. It wasn't the actual warehouse, was it?
No, it was us studios.
Yeah. So it became the warehouse in what year? Do you know?
That I do not. Gerald, do you know?
Okay. And Frankie came in 78 or 77? He was brought in that year. 78?
Because I think Benny Winfield was playing in 77. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was Frankie came in
78?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the warehouse closed what year?
80. What did you say? 81.
81?
Yeah, it was 81.
Or was it the beginning of 82?
82, 3. 82. It was 82. It was 82. I just asked Robert that. It was 82. Yeah.
I'm trying to speed through this a little bit. Y'all bear with me because I'm trying to formulate this timeline. In 82, oh, here's a question. What year did after the warehouse closed, did Robert open the Music Box?
83. He opened up the warehouse, the Music Box, right after Frankie did the power plant first. That was 82. November of 82, we opened up the power plant. And then Robert opened up the Music Box in the middle of 83.
Were those rival clubs?
Yeah, we were.
Okay. So I love the story. I'm sorry, I'll get to you in a second. I just need to get this timeline done. One of the interesting stories I've learned is that when Frankie went to look at the space that would become the power plant, Robert Williams actually went with him.
No, actually, Frankie was there. He called me and asked me to pick up Robert to come down to, at that particular time, the club was called Riverside. It was a leather bar in the middle of Cabrini Green. And they weren't making any money because the guys were afraid to come. And the ones that did come, they were breaking into their cars. So at that particular time, Frankie was DJing there, and he invited Robert and myself down to the club. And I never forget it. We walked in. Frankie said, "What do you all think?" And I was like, "Nice." And he said, "Well, I want to buy it." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. That'll be cool if you bought it." Robert got mad because he looked up in the ceiling and he saw his tweeter arrays that used to be in the warehouse hanging in the club. those were the tweeters. Those were speakers. He had the club had his speakers in there, and he didn't know anything about it, and he was a little upset.
All right. So, I think I've gotten the timeline, what, of 82 now? Okay, in 1983, well, the power plant opened in November of 1982.
Correct.
Correct.
And the only reason I remember that is because I just found the archive tape. Frankie, when he opened up the power plant, he did, instead of doing flyers, he actually passed out cassettes. And it was a digital voice saying, "This is the voice of the power plant 1015." And he announced the grand opening, and the song "Walk the Night" was his own special remix of "Walk Tonight" was on this cassette, and that's what we passed out as the invitation to the party. And that's the only reason I remember that.
Now, there were also other clubs going on at the time, like the Loft. There was Sawyer's on 23rd in Michigan. And, I mean, there was First Impressions, there was the Penthouse, there was the Tree of Life. There were all kinds of things going on at that time.
161 West.
All right, now.
161.
At that time, these are basically the same kind of high school kids that were going to Mendel. And I need to speak, I'm going to ask you some questions after this, but again, this is the timeline. These kids, which were my peers, went to Kenwood, went to Mendel, went to St. Ignatius, Whitney Young, you name it, were part of a crew that my brother Wayne and Robert Ellis, otherwise known as Batman, called the Goodies. All right, anybody heard that term before? So basically, we were the kids who, wore the K-Swiss and the Izods and hung out in Hyde Park at the Point and the Highlands and all that kind of stuff. And we used to have our own little parties, in the basements of the mansions and all that kind of stuff at U-High, you name it. And subsequently, that crowd became the crowd that would start going to the warehouse and start going to the power plant and all these other places. All of this kind of culminated in about 82, 83, 83-ish, and there was one song that kind of permeated the mood around that time. This is before I did On and On, before I did Fantasy or any of that. Does anybody know what that song is?
Is it all over my face?
Waiting on My Angel. No,
Nope.
Your Love.
Your Love by?
Jamie Principle.
Okay. Does anybody tell me about that story? I'm sure you can, Craig, but does anybody else
Let's
know
give
the story?
somebody else a chance.
I want to, but you know it, so, and we don't have a lot of time.
Well, Jamie Principle, actually, most interesting, Jamie was introduced to Frankie and myself by a good friend of mine, Louis Gomez. Jamie came down very shy, very timid young man. One of the things at the power plant that we used to do all the time was play new music. If an artist or anybody was in the room, like Chip E., Jesse Saunders, Steve Hurley, Farley, all of these guys used to literally bring their music to us while the party was going on. And if we would just put it in the headphones, put it on the reel-to-reel, and if we thought it was hot just listening to it just that quick, we would drop it right then. It wasn't one of those situations like it is today where a DJ plans his set and all that and only plays what's hot. And we were breaking new music right then and there. I mean, these guys would literally come from their studio and bring it to us, and we would drop it if it was hot. Jamie was one of those guys, but Jamie was really, really shy. And Jose Gomez, who is Louis Gomez, was working with him at the time, and he brought Jamie down and introduced Jamie to Frankie, and he was working on a track called Your Love. He gave it to Frankie, it was on the reel-to-reel. Frankie put it on the reel-to-reel, was standing there listening while the party was going on, turned around and looked at Jamie and Jose, and then just like shook his head like he couldn't believe it, and he dropped it. And Your Love, it was history ever since.
Yeah, everybody had a copy on cassette.
Yeah.
And
this is again where the discrepancy comes in, where I give him credit for having the first release on vinyl, but Your Love was floating around before On and On. But it wasn't released until almost 3, 4, 5 years later. It took a long time for Jamie's stuff to get out, but Jesse's stuff was out like that.
Marta, do you remember hearing Your Love for the first time? You remember where you were?
You know what? Yes, but to me, you know what song, there are two songs that really define house and disco to me. And one is It All Over My Face? And that's the version where the males are singing, because I know they have two. And then the other is Martin's Circus, and I think that's more disco.
Yeah.
Well, both of those are disco. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you first
They
heard
dance
Your
music
Love,
to me.
how did you feel? What did it make you feel like?
I don't recall when
You don't
I
recall?
first heard it, honestly.
Anybody?
Yeah, you know, we actually played the cassette version of Your Love on NUR, and it was like, I don't know how many generations, but it was just, you know, we couldn't EQ the thing. We just, you know, we just played it. And it was, because it was so hot. Yeah. It was so hot. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I first heard it, I don't remember the place. I can just remember the atmosphere, but when it came on the speakers and that boom, 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 boom came on, I was like, whoa. I had never heard anything like that before in my life. Made me say, hey, I want to go make a record. No, let me. Actually, my first record that I wrote was called Fantasy. And it was Z Factor featuring Jesse Saunders, and the man who released it is right up here, Mitch, with Mitch Ball Records. Let me give him a hand. Now, Mitch has the unique distinction of almost having the world's first house record. The problem was he didn't release it before I released On and On. He had it first. So that's how On and On became the first house record. Let's see, George. 1984, January of 1984. Right? What are your hottest records in the store, in retail?
Right.
Well, I'm asking for a reason.
My situation is different than like going to a club and what have you, because
Right.
I mean, it could have been Muddy Waters that was the hottest record, you know, because there were so many records in those days. I mean, you know, it's not like today where everything is, you know, the digital side, but jeez, I'm trying to remember those.
Well, I'll tell you what was out. When Doves Cry by Prince.
Okay,
You had Holiday by Madonna.
I remember that.
And I remember these records because I was in a bunch of pools, IRS pool, the audio talent and all those kind of stuff. And I remember the day we hit #1 with On and On, we beat out When Doves Cry and Madonna Holiday, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. This little kid in his basement on the south side has a record that's beating out the top of it. I was 21. And those records, and a quote from Marshall Jefferson. I love Marshall Jefferson because he keeps it real. He said that that's the single most important record, On and On is the single most important record because it made other Chicago DJs and producers know that they could make a record too. Because I was accessible, I was a DJ, I was hanging out like everybody else. At first I used to take that kind of as an insult. Now I take it as the biggest compliment ever because I think sparking that movement with that record and going to retail, as you said, we used to sell them directly to the stores. So here's a fun fact real quick. 12-inch records at that time retailed for $3.99, right? Vince Lawrence, did the song together. We decided that was stupid. Why did they take the penny off? Let's just put the penny back and sell them for $4, right? Not knowing that there's a wholesaler and a one-stop and everybody else in between that have to get their cut. So when we walk in the record store and we see them selling for $6.99 and $7.99, we were like, whoa, what's going on? But that point on, we changed the game in respect of, well, first off, we distributed our own records and sold them direct to retail. That was the first thing. And the second thing was we knew that if we could change the game at that point, that all of our people that were working with us, everyone coming behind us could do the same, and we could start this new genre. But I had to give you that as an aside.
See, what you also did, you challenged the system. You guys created this music, and you had your own way of distribution. I mean, you had record promoters, you had all these different other labels and independent labels that didn't know what the heck was going on, but you guys took up airtime on radio stations that they wanted their artists on. And see, that was the politics of the game. And like when you mentioned Peter Brown and what have you, the music coming out of Hialeah, Florida, TK Records. You know, Need a Ward, Ring My Bell, and what have you. And see, so you created a movement that no one has done since.
Man, we did not know what we were doing. We were ignorant.
You know, and if you look at it, what's really interesting is there were several young people that were doing this, you know, that started, you know, like you said, they kicked it off to show that this could be done. And you got a lot of people that started pressing and distributing their own stuff, their own records right here in Chicago. I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned earlier about the radio and dance music. House music actually, at one particular point, had airtime. It was in direct competition with hip hop. I was chief engineer for DJ International for about 7 years. So I was doing work with Fast Eddie, Tyree Cooper, Cool Rock Steady, all these guys. At one particular 10 City, at one particular point, you could turn on the radio, you would hear 10 City, their whole album, you know, being played. And at the same time, hip hop was just making its birth as the one, you know, and it was like a competition, and I don't know what happened, but something, because it was neck and neck, and then something happened, and house music just got, the hip hop overtook it, and house music went back underground. But at one particular point, we were getting airplay. We were getting straight airplay.
Rob.
Outside of those
Go ahead.
mixes, because that's
Yeah,
really
it was
how I
outside
was
of,
exposed
no, it was
to
outside of the mixes. Yeah.
Just outside of the mixes, and I knew that college radio had just jumped on it.
Yeah.
And I always knew Jesse as the face of this new movement, because what year was that Channel 7 interview done with you? Because I remember that.
That was, I think, the summer of '84.
Okay, because I remember that.
No, I'm sorry. That was the spring of '84.
Okay.
Because
Yeah,
it was before
I
Funk
remember-
You Up came out. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I remember that distinctly, that, you know, you were the face of this new movement of Chicago local music.
And when did you notice that, from a radio standpoint, when did you notice the music start to change from the disco sound to this new house sound?
You know, we had a lot of our DJs, they selected their own music and played their own music. So we were doing a lot of the older stuff, and then as the newer Chicago material became available, we started playing that, and they started playing that, and they started playing in mixes, and so it really became a great movement for not only college radio, but for everybody else. That's what I really noticed, and that was, I want to say that was probably the spring of '85 when, well, see, we didn't get serviced by DJ International. I mean, it really took a lot to get DJ International product.
Really?
Yeah. And I had to go down to Larry Sherman's place just to pick up a bunch of Trax records. I mean, we were never getting serviced on that either.
Well, you could have picked up both Trax and DJ International at Larry's place.
Pardon?
And Michael Jackson records and everybody else. That's an inside joke if you guys don't know.
You need to explain that. Larry Sherman was the owner of Trax Records. And Larry also was one of the only people in the city of Chicago that owned his own pressing plant. So put the two and two together. A lot of stuff he did not own ended up coming out.
Well,
Also,
how many people bought a Michael Jackson Thriller record? Raise your hand. Most likely you bought a Larry Sherman pressing of that.
Yeah. Actually, he pressed the whole collection of Philadelphia Classic, their whole catalog. But I don't know if you guys remember, that's when he was on Channel 7 News and the FBI was escorting him.
Yeah, because there was a whole series on CDs.
Oh, yeah. He took old vinyl. He would buy some old vinyl that didn't sell, crunch it up, and then like put whatever he could possibly find, whatever record he wanted to sell at the moment. I remember
was hot.
with my label, Jesse Records was my label. I remember walking into the plant one day, and I hadn't ordered any records to go out for sale. And I found boxes and stacks of them up there that he had been undercutting us and selling to record stores. But anyway, that's another story. I want someone who's up here, Mr. Mitchell, who owns Mitch Ball Records, to give us an idea of what was going on with Mitch Ball Records in the 70s.
Hello, everybody. That I actually,
Turn that way. Yes, stay that way.
this is fabulous, that I actually cut Jesse's very first record, right, Jesse?
First song.
It's called Fantasy. And that how that became was my son, Vincent Lawrence. I was a record producer that was producing 45s. My son said, "Dad, they're not doing that anymore. What they're doing is they're doing a dance cut, dance, and then extending it for 4 and 5 and 6, 7 minutes. And then instead of for $1 you sell a 45 for, you could sell it for $5 on a 12-inch. I said, "Wow, yeah, that's more." And so that what happened was that Jesse's song called Fantasy, that we were doing a group called Z Factor. And Jesse brought us Fantasy. And I said, "Wow, Jesse, you want to get into Z Factor so we can have your cut?" He said, "Yeah." So, boom, we released it. And Jesse went off and did his own thing. He took my son with him. and so me saying, I'm not going to let these youngsters just kick me to the curb. So I just continue. Anybody that would bring me a song, I released it. And guess what? It was a hit. On and on. I mean, I would add my old school stuff with people like, in fact, I talked to him last night, Eddie Thomas. He's doing fine. Eddie Thomas is started the Impressions, Jerry Butler, and on. Gene Chandler, and on and on. But to say that, anyway, so we started producing 12 inches. And one of my...
What year was that?
I don't remember yesterday. I'm getting old. And say the only person in here that's older than me is my man right here. And I'll say I'm 75 in 2 more months. See, you're older, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's the only person in here. So George is okay. So I don't remember. But one thing that I remember was my son took me down to the music box and said, "This is where they're doing, and this is what they're listening to, and this is what they're dancing." I walked in that place and got a contact high. You saw people on the dance floor making love. No, in the sense, it was crazy. That's it. And this is underneath Michigan Avenue downtown. And me in my older mind saying, are they letting this happen downtown? From the drugs to the grinding and bumping and all that. I said, wow, it blew my mind. Was it happening just, okay? No, to an older person, he said, that's just like going to a nightclub now and everybody's lighting up and they, woo, wow. And I mean, 2 and 3 dudes on one girl, I'm like, okay, wow. Okay.
Hey, Mitch, we're going to have to wrap it up, man.
Okay, but say that anyway, that
literally,
I am, I am still in the game, and
all right.
and we have a release that is going to release, say, Farley did a version, Port Malik, Latif, and on Rachel. Is Rachel on here? No. But I say that. Anyway, it's called Love is the Answer. It's a leader project. Hopefully, it'll be one of the better things that come out of Chicago. And
hold on, I gotta wrap this up. I want to
okay,
thank
one more
everybody.
thing. Commercial. Okay. That we found that 122 beats per minute was the most acceptable house music, and so that we did a compilation of, I think it's about 18 different cuts on a 3 CD thing of all the house music that Mitch Ball Records have made.
All right, I want to thank all my panelists for coming out and speaking on From When Disco Turned House. Craig Loftis.
Thank you.
George Daniels. Rob Olson. And the beautiful Marta Bailey Hopkins. Thank you.